Polivy. I'm the director of brand development at Stateless, where we help build fashion startups. And at Stateless, we have two main departments. We have product and we have brand. And on the branding side is where we help develop soup to nuts apparel companies, visual and verbal identities. And so today we're going to talk about how to build a brand that creates an emotional connection with your customers and why that's really important. And before we get started, I should just also mention Makers Row's partnership in launching embark.live, which is going to be a community of small business category experts. So I'll be on there and I'm going to have a bunch of different videos talking about different aspects of branding and how to approach it for your startup. And yeah, so embark.live should be launching in early June. So you can go and sign up now, and then you'll be part of the community once it launches in a few weeks. And it's a super cool platform. I'm really excited about it. And yeah, so today again, we're talking about how to make a brand that connects with customers in an emotional way that kind of keeps them loyal to your brand. So to start, I want to just kind of talk about some examples I think that will be helpful to kind of show how this particular train of thought is important when considering how to build an effective brand. So two companies I like to compare are Ralph Lauren and Uggs. So if you look at Ugg boots, they basically have launched with this very strong emphasis on the innovation of their product, that they had the most comfortable product at the time, and they really, like built very quickly and were super successful for a period of time. But that sort of like strong emphasis on the product and lack of emphasis on building more of a sort of distinct culture and a world around their brand ended up kind of limiting their growth. And so if you look at their sort of growth trajectory, it goes like this, and then it basically plateaus. So it's definitely not a failure story by any means, but if you look at it compared to the growth of Ralph Lauren that just continues and continues to grow exponentially over time, I attribute a large part of that success for Ralph Lauren to the fact that they placed a huge emphasis on building a distinct brand world. And so, Ralph launched with innovative products. He had the thick tie when everyone else had skinny ties, and then he introduced the polo shirts, and there was definitely a lot of success that was built on the product design. But by having this emphasis on a brand world, it created an emotional connection that maintained customer loyalty despite so many other brands imitating its products. Whereas Uggs, if you kind of think about what is really attaching me to the Ugg brands, if another product is equally comfortable or more comfortable or a lower price point, what is keeping me attached to Ugg? Whereas with Ralph Lauren, the brand represents so much more than any one of its products or even the collection of its products. It represents this broader idea of Americana, and it's just a very specific feeling that you get whether you're in his stores or restaurants or watching one of his runway shows or experiencing an ad campaign in a magazine. It's always this kind of fits within this well-defined world, and you kind of come to rely on that aesthetic and that message, and it's a sense of comfort, and it's just a sense, it just means something more to you than a brand like Ugg. And so A modern example to me of UGG could be Allbirds. So the long-term success of Allbirds remains to be seen. Right now, it's super successful. It's doing really well, but it does have that same sort of emphasis on the innovation of the product, the materials that it's made with, and how comfortable the shoes are. But is there a culture surrounding Allbirds that really resonates with at first a niche audience that they can then build off of? So it's possible that the innovation of their product and their emphasis on that can lead to very sort of relatively short-term success. But over the long term, are they going to continue to grow as other companies imitate their products, offer their more comfortable products, more sustainable products, or lower price point products? Is there something that's really truly tying your emotional attachment to Allbirds? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. It's definitely very well done. The brand of it has very clean design. It's very sort of tasteful in its presentation, and they did give a lot of consideration to branding, but they didn't necessarily build that culture the way that I feel like Ralph Lauren did. So another, to me, a modern example of a company that's done it successfully, that definitely isn't as successful as Allbirds right now, but maybe can continue to maintain growth over time in a similar way to Ralph Lauren, is a brand called Camp Collection. And the way that Camp Collection approached it is their brand is tied to the nostalgic summer camp environment, and their clothes are kind of all based on sort of ideas around camp. But so they started with that very sort of niche audience of millennials that identify with having gone to summer camp, having loved summer camp at a very particular time in their life, so 80s and 90s, and the brand kind of just brings them back to that feeling. And if they wear a product, they can kind of bring that sort of the positive emotions that they have associated with their memories of summer camp. But then what they were able to do is so that's a pretty niche audience of people that really identify with that and that aesthetic and that feeling. But then they're able to kind of broaden it and build off of that over time. So over time, like at first there, you get to the website and it used to be girls bunk, boys bunk for like male products and female products. And now it's not just solely about camp, although that's the sort of core of its identity, the way that like polo, the sport of polo and Americana is the sort of core of the Ralph Lauren identity. They've kind of broadened it to maintain that general feeling, but that general feeling is really more about nostalgia, specifically for millennial culture. Like, what is nostalgic to that feeling of summer camp that might not necessarily be in a cabin, bunk, or at summer camp, but just that feeling of hanging out with friends, of maybe watching movies, or maybe just whatever sort of the winter equivalent is. And by having that sort of broader notion and that broader sort of definition of what their feeling was, they can just kind of build off of that audience. So they clearly had an understanding early on of what their main attributes were, and it was this particular version of nostalgia, particularly American nostalgia. And then also they kind of clearly defined their color palette early on, and how they approach photography, and what their main, like how they approach their voice, their tone of voice, their use of language. Like all of that remains consistent, whether or not they're directly talking about or photographing within the summer camp environment. So I think that brand is super successful. Again, it's called Camp Collection if you want to check it out. And so that's basically when we're building a brand for our audience and thinking about how do they start to build their own unique brand world. It's kind of thinking about what influences are you bringing in, aesthetic influences, And then what's your sort of broader mission and feeling, and how do you define that feeling? So the way that we take our clients through that is we start with a brand questionnaire. And just quickly speaking about questions, I'm going to just blaze through this little talk, and then at the end I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have. I see that you've started to ask some questions in the comments, and I'll review the comments at the end and go through as many answers as I can. But so to talk about how we at Stateless take a client through helping them define that unique brand world that creates that emotional connection and that loyalty that we were talking about. For us, it starts with a questionnaire process where we ask our clients, what if your brand was a smell, what would it be? If your brand was a movie, if your brand was a piece of architecture or a piece of literature, what would it be? And starting to think about, again, those aesthetic influences that you're bringing in, that sort of core feeling, and how do you, by thinking about how that feeling applies to all five senses, it helps you think about the real characteristics of it, because you want your brand to sound like it smells, like it looks, like it reads. Like that should all be one feeling. It should have a sense of synesthesia, connecting the senses. So yeah, we take you through that process, that questionnaire, kind of have a back and forth, try to make a feeling of cohesion across all of the different answers. And then once we have that clearly articulated, then we start to translate that into your master brand, which are the sort of core assets of your brand that should hopefully last the lifetime of your whole company. And so the first piece that we usually do is building a mood board, which is it's kind of like a collage of images that represent that unique feeling of your brand world. So it has, you bring in different images that you kind of curate from the internet that kind of defines the specific textures and colors, in a little bit content, but it doesn't necessarily, all the images don't have to conceptually directly relate as far as like what's being depicted in the images. It's really more about what is that feeling, what are those colors, textures, vibe. And then so you kind of create that collage of images that represents that. And then for sure, once you've kind of gone through that process with your designer of going through the mood board and getting to the place where you really feel like, yes, this mood board really just aligns with my vision, it feels right, that then is something that you can build off of for everything you create afterwards. So we usually start with the logo. The logo is like a really just important element of again, just distilling that feeling of your brand, the message of your brand, the meaning of your brand down to a very specific font and a specific shape that is your icon. And then from there, we develop a whole, after like the master brand elements also that include, your like tagline, your color palette, these sort of like important elements. Then we develop a style guide, which is like a 50-page document that really goes in depth in really articulating and fleshing out your brand and what are the rules of your brand and how and when it's applied in all of these different areas. And the reason why that's super important is because the most important thing that you can have in order to create that emotional connection and create that distinct brand world is cohesion. So really thinking through up front before you launch or shortly after you launch, how do I maintain that cohesion through everything that I create? So how do I maintain cohesion when I'm writing an Instagram post, or when I'm building a billboard campaign, or I'm shooting a video, or I'm building a website, or I'm building a pop-up store? Like, how do I make sure that everything that I create is going to feel connected and feel part of the same vision and feeling? So the style guide really becomes the sort of handbook for how to do that. And then once we have the style guide, once we have those master brand assets, and everything is just clearly defined, then we can start to create the sort of essential elements like your packaging, your photography, your video, your website, your social media guidelines, everything else. Once you kind of have done that thorough process and thought it all through, creating everything after that becomes a little bit easier. And the sort of choices that you make of how to approach something as simple as your business cards just becomes a little clearer. Or it was a lot clearer, actually. So we help through all of that. So we have a team of writers and graphic designers and web developers and photographers and videographers, and we just kind of our sort of emphasis throughout the whole process is cohesion, and so kind of tying that all together and tying that all within the product development, which is the other half of our business. We're kind of just thinking about how everything, again, ties together, forms that same cohesive vision through the apparel and everything else. So that's basically it. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have here, and you can, if you want to reach out to me later, you can go to makersrow.com/stateless, which is down here. Seeing myself in reverse. And also, again, we'll be on embark.live in a few weeks. So I'll go check out some of the questions. This is from Crystal. Okay, so what are your suggestions to building a brand that connects in today's market? In social media marketing, a big portion in contributing to successful branding. So today's market, one very sort of straightforward way, I've talked about a sort of in-depth process of creating, bringing in different sort of influences to create a specific culture, like Camp Collection being camp, or summer camp, or Nike started off with a niche culture of running and appealing to runners and being founded by a runner. So you can have these sort of like niche cultures that you can kind of build your aesthetic and your messaging around, as well as your products around, and then build off of that. And I feel like identifying maybe some niche cultures that maybe don't have a brand, or at least a well-done brand that really speaks to them. So thinking about that, and maybe that's you. That's really the best case scenario, is thinking about, am I someone that feels like there isn't really a brand that really says, I get you and your specific interests and your specific aesthetic and feeling, and your specific, combination of unique interests. And so maybe that's a good place to start, and how, trying to define that, because usually you're not alone. Usually there's more people that have a similar combination of interests or taste as you do, and you can kind of build off of that. But then another way, like a more straightforward way, is aligning yourself with an influencer. So the most probably one of the biggest examples of that recently is Beats by Dre. Is something that that brand was launched with the emotional connection to Dr. Dre. So he's someone that everyone has a respect for, and a history with, and his sort of alignment with the headphones is, if you don't have a deep technical understanding of the difference between different headphones, that kind of is what's going to push you over the edge as far as deciding between Beats by Dre headphones versus something else, is your emotional attachment to Dr. Dre and what he stands for. So I think that they were really successful in being able to leverage that. Obviously, we don't all have the ability to get someone as powerful as Dr. Dre, but that idea of kind of aligning your brand with someone that people trust or kind of speaks to the audience of the culture, the niche culture of your brand, and someone that people really admire and care about and aligns with their values. That an influencer, in addition to building the aesthetic around what that influencer represents, I think is a good way to go about it. And I think that in some ways, the sort of influencer market has become kind of superficial or overdone, or people are maybe aligning their values or not trusting their own tastes and caring too much about what celebrities think. But the core concept of it, I think, is meaningful in that it adds a human quality to a brand, and that you are more willing to connect with a person than a company. So if that person really represents something to you and you feel an emotional attachment to that person, then that's a really a great sort of piece to have as part of your brand. Thank you, Alice. So does anyone else have any questions before we run? I'll give you guys one more second, and then this video will be available. It should save onto YouTube and come back. Okay, here's a question. Sorry. Okay, from Joanne. How do you prioritize clients? Is it based on services packages we buy from Stateless? Do you provide free consultations to see what's a good fit? What's the normal time duration that it takes to launch those who generally have their ideas set, but not all the other pieces you mentioned flesh out? Great question. So Joanne, we prioritize clients. I don't really ever really think about that. I try to keep every client at equal priority, no matter what their scale or budget is. That sounds kind of hokey coming out of my mouth, but that's truly how it is. But then, do we offer free consultations? Absolutely. We start with just kind of a simple sort of assessment of where you're at and what your vision is, and what particular services and approaches are going to be best suited for your particular needs, your particular goals, and your particular budget. And then if we are doing the full package, that sort of full scale approach that I mentioned, where that includes like the style guide and all of the different elements, that usually takes about a year, because we're usually developing it alongside apparel. So the apparel development process is really the thing that takes a year. If your apparel is already in place, or for some reason, magical reason, you're able to develop your products from scratch within less than a year, then the branding aspect of it will usually take less time. But obviously, we need to wait for branding wait for product in order to develop certain pieces, like photography, for example, or our lifestyle and our product shots need to wait for the apparel, or at least final samples, to be finished. Website too, something like that. So so it could take anywhere from 6 months to a year is what I would say. Okay, so from Kim Martin, how niche can or should one go to stand apart? Example, can there be too many plant-based beauty products? Should add another distinct to stand apart? Absolutely, 100%. I would say, I guess with anything, there's a limit to how niche you should go. Maybe there's a certain threshold where you've added too many different components and will just confuse your audience. I think that's the main place at which you would know if you're too niche, is if you're just it just doesn't feel cohesive. It feels scattered because you have too many different influences. If a client's kind of initial answer to the questionnaire has a little bit too many different pieces to it, then I try to refine it and hone in on something that feels distinct. But then, yes, absolutely, we think about how to stand out within your particular market. And if your market is flooded with plant-based beauty products, which I'm sure it is, then thinking about an additional element. Right now, I think actually, fortunately, sustainability is kind of an overdone thing. So it's no longer a unique approach the way that it was initially for when Allbirds first launched, which it wasn't even that long ago. But now so many brands have kind of made that the emphasis of their message. So I think that adding another layer to it, or at least a unique angle on sustainability, or just natural products, or how your products are made, or how, the transparency of it. I think just adding a unique angle to it, which I think could be cultural too. Just thinking about, just something that maybe it's some sort of like foreign tradition that you're bringing in to kind of influence just your aesthetic, or some point in history that is interesting to you, that you're kind of drawing influence from that aesthetic. So I would definitely recommend kind of looking at the market landscape and thinking about, is my additional elements truly unique compared to all of them? And when they see my Instagram feed versus a typical plant-based beauty product Instagram feed, is it going to resonate, and is it going to feel different? No matter whether or not they see your brand name, are they going to just see an image and just know that that's you? That's helpful. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and I hope to see you guys again. Thanks so much.